is to get this on YouTube. We wanted to put this out. We put some ads in the Lobo. We put some flyers. We tried to get it on a couple radio stations to get the word out so they could hear it. We've done a few other things, but our main goal is I had already put a manuscript, you've seen that on YouTube, and just woefully inadequate. We used a text-to-speech program, and I mean, it's a good starting place. But the inflections, the accents, there's no way to see any, body gestures or body language. It just, you lose a lot. I think we talked about that on Joe. So our purpose today is to just get this out, put this on YouTube, and then do a little bit more disseminating and then see what kind of response we get. We have on Facebook, we've been doing those push ads that you buy where you can target certain cities, and we did that. One of the cities that I targeted that I think we're getting a good result, about the 10%, 1%, and you know the story, how that goes. You reach 100 people, you'll get 10 who are interested, and if you get one to actually...
If you're getting 10 out of 100, you're doing good. 3 hits out of 100 is average.
Right, so we got a good response from Mumbai, from the old Bombay, India, East Indians. Apparently, we're just really connecting with some people out there. Smart people, guys that are, technologically savvy, have education, and I think there's a lot of spirituality in that city, and so they're kind of searching, and they're willing to look at new theories and new ideas. Hong Kong is one of the places. Great Britain also, I got some responses in the UK, which I thought was kind of cool, but we targeted some other cities. We test little places like Berlin and Paris and other places like that, just to kind of see what we get. So that's our reason today, and that's what we're going to be doing, is to just get this on YouTube, and we'll edit it and make it the way we want. So let me kind of get started, and let me tell you a funny story to begin with. So I used to be an IT director at a school district, and we would hear stories about people who would call for tech support. And one of the earliest stories that we would get is an elderly lady who would call and say, my cup holder in my computer isn't working. And the response was, what do you mean your cup holder isn't working? She goes, yeah, every morning when I go to my emails, I'm going to send things to my grandsons, and I get on there and I press the button and the cup holder comes out and I put my coffee there. And she goes, it's not working. And the tech support person was like, what do you mean? So after a little bit of discussion, they found out that the button was for the CD DVD drive, and that's where she put her coffee. Now, the reason why I tell you that story is because each generation has a different way they look at computers. It would never have entered into the mind, at least from when I've talked with some of the young people, and I call millennials. These are people who've grown up with electronic devices. Things like social media, all of the Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat, those kind of things are something they've grown up with. And they have, I think, a little different perspective. The older lady, she's thinking, this is great for holding my coffee. That serves a purpose for that. So one of the things I want to do is try to come at this from the perspective of connecting with young people in a way that I think that they see things differently. And we talked about this before. Movies like The Matrix, the remix of the redo, or whatever you want to call it, remake of Tron, the newer version, even Avatar. Avatar showed the idea that you could take the artificial intelligence components, which we would call consciousness, and embed that in another bioorganic device, that there could be a transfer. And we call it science fiction, but the idea that we're coming across now is that the lines are starting to blur between what we call consciousness and what is artificial intelligence. So I kind of want to jump into this by giving you another story. So can you imagine that you lend your phone to somebody, could be a friend or whatever, and when you get it back, the screen is completely different. The desktop has been changed, the wallpaper's been changed, the color, the fonts, everything, the apps are in different places, they're in those little folders. Now, if you're a young person who's a millennial, I guarantee you that is a huge breach of protocol. I mean, you're talking somebody ready to punch someone's lights out because you just messed with their life. That's actually the way they see their life. Statistically, and I think it's proven experientially, that females like to nest. You know what that means, nesting? They'll decorate it. I know when I was growing up and as a bachelor, my apartment looked like, I didn't even put anything on the walls. It was just functional. I came there, I ate, I slept, and I was out. You know, I was surfing and I was skiing and I was skateboarding and I was going to events at college and it didn't care. My female friends of mine, you would go to their apartments or their dorms, they had all their favorite pictures and posters and they had everything, they had it all decorated a certain way and it was just really homey and comfortable. And if you look at phones, it's the same thing. I cannot tell you how many males have never changed their desktop at all. But it's like, it's fine, you know. Now, after a while, you might have some scenery and a screensaver or whatever, but I tell you the first thing when I see a female get a phone is she's gonna fix it. In fact, it doesn't even look like, it could be the same Samsung, but it doesn't even look like that once they get a hold of it. So can you imagine somebody just messed with it? We're talking super problem here. That illustrates the difference between the generations, I think. And so I think the millennials and the young people today, their life is now, we were just discussing that, is encapsulated in an electronic device, far more than any other generation. I was one of those first users of all the coolest things that came out, if I could afford it. I had one of the old Timex watches that you actually held up to a screen and a barcode thing flashed, and then it would sync your calendar to it, and sync your contacts in your phone. It was like the greatest thing ever to have it on a watch. Of course, now I have a Samsung watch. It has its own SIM card, and I can call and do anything I want independently. So it illustrates the fact that I'm one of those guys who likes that, but at the same time, I'm still not of that same generation. I don't change my desktops. I don't change my colors. I don't care about my fonts. I don't care. I don't move my apps. In fact, it sounds crazy. As much as a technology guru kind of guy I like to think of myself, I don't even really have time for computers because I work on them all day long. I'm an IT guy. When I'm done at the end of the day, I don't want to see a computer. I know that sounds crazy. I don't want to look. I have friends that call me up. They used to call me up and they said, Howard, it's Friday night. I got the greatest thing. I said, come on over and help me install and set up my new computer. I'm like, what? Are you kidding? I don't want to see a computer. And so I have other friends that live virtually in the gaming world. Now, I just watched some videos yesterday about a company called Euclidean, who has come up with a new way. Has anybody heard of Euclidean? It's a new way to do computer graphics. Up till now, we've been doing games with what they call polygons, which are little triangles. If you've ever looked at virtual reality and you've looked at the technology we use, it's still kind of bumpy and still kind of angular. Do you know what I'm talking about? And you can't get the detail. Matthias knows what I'm talking about. Now they call this atomistic structuring, where they're using almost like atoms, like not pixels, but atoms that have like characteristics to it. And so they're actually able to make it with a definition that is extremely photorealistic. I mean, crazy realistic. You can go from 30,000 feet all the way down to the grain of a sand, and it looks like real. And without the kind of lag that we have in computer processing now. That's a huge leap, because now that means that we can make virtual reality look like the reality that we live in. The problem with virtual reality up to this point is when you put two visions, when you have two eyes, when you put two mechanisms to look at an object, you can then see the angularity of the object itself, and it gets the polygons begin to show up. But with this new technology, it'll look like photorealism without bogging down the processor. Because up till now, even though we've had Moore's Law, we're running into some problems because we're going down to the nano size. And once those circuits, if you know how that works, it's an on and off circuit. Once those circuits get really close, what happens when they get really close at the nano level? They start to bleed over. The difference between an off and an on transistor, it gets the actual voltage level gets varied to the point that it loses its ability to retain that value, either the 0 or the 1. So we're running into some real problems now. And so this is an answer to that. But all that to kind of explain that we see things now through our interface. So the kids nowadays, whether they have an Apple, an iOS, or they have a Windows computer, a laptop or tablet, or they have Linux using a version of Android, which is an operating system, that's their interface to the world. So never before has there been a generation that literally is willing to swap their interface for something non-physical, not connected to their body. First time ever. I watch young people, they're at a Denny's, and I've seen this many times over, on their devices. None of them are talking to each other. They're completely on their device. I don't think people get the gravity of that. They have now changed their interface from this to this. That means that if they had a choice, and I've asked many of them, if they had a choice to live in a virtual reality world with superpowers, they would do it. And the reason why I know they do it is I already have some that spend more hours in that world than this one. That's already a reality. Young people who would rather be in that virtual world than be in this physical world, this analog. This is an analog world. Our senses are analog in nature. We don't directly connect with the digital numerical values of the electrons, nucleus, protons. We do not directly manipulate them or connect with them. If it wasn't for math, we wouldn't even understand them. When we were as human beings, we're trying to figure out what are the elements, what are the things made of, whether they're carbon or hydrogen or helium or iron or gold or copper or radium, any of those elements, we had to have mathematical formulas to see the unseen. And we knew what their electron properties would be, how many electrons would be in orbit, we knew what their gravitational weight would be. So every generation before this used math to connect to the digital numerical world. This generation directly connects to it through a different interface. Now that, like I said, that's a huge thing. And so I think this generation is ready for this message. And what is this message? Well, this message is a variation of the simulation theory to some extent. It says that, look, DNA is a code. It's genetic code. We'd all agree it's code. It's based upon those 4 amino acids that we classify letters as GATC, but in fact, they're genetic codes. We use something called CRISPR, which is now a way to manipulate the genetic code. We're now also understanding that virtually everything out there is based upon these discrete quantize. That's the word quantize. It means a quantity, a specific value. And we know that because we use things like Planck's constant, Max Planck. He came up and he was able through mathematical formulas to understand that everything has a specific limitation. The distance of a size of an object can only be so small. I think it's 10 to the minus 35 centimeters. There's actually a specific limit to the size or amount or length of time. And that makes sense because if you understand math, you know that time, space, and matter are all connected. Now, if we can prove that there are a specific quantized value of time and a specific quantized value of matter, and now a specific quantized value of space, because space is not empty. Part of what we also see is when we point our electron telescopes into deep space, we get something called background noise. And we say that's left over from the Big Bang. I'm speculating, and I'm offering this, that's what this theory is that all of the noise, all of the static, all of the randomness, all of the disorder, all of the chaos, all of the asymmetry that you see, we call them discrepancies within normal variances. If you ask professors nowadays, you say, well, I wanted to do some research on subatomic particles. Or let's say I wanted to do research on carbon nanotubes. And you guys know graphene is the latest thing. Graphene is the hope for super batteries. Graphene is the hope for desalinization of water. Graphene is the hope for medicine, for the delivery system, for nanoparticles, for nanomedicine. All of those things have specific shapes. But when you look at them under an electron microscope, have you ever noticed they look kind of squiggly and wiggly and a little twisty and a little asymmetrical and kind of funky, and the smaller you get, the more strange things appear? Now, normally if you go to a professor or someone who's educated, and they're usually older, because they're not yet millennials, not yet. We got a few pretty smart ones. And you say, why is this like this? They'll just say, oh, those are just normal variances. Now, in my movie that we're working on, we've already written a manuscript called the Vitruvian Code Project. I have these scientists, research scientists. They're doing development, they're growing carbon nanotubes. And you know that you grow them like crystals, if you know anything about them. And in this movie, they grow these carbon nanotubes. They create a computer program called a simulation growth program. So they can vary things like electromagnetic field, gravitational pressures, gases that are used. They can make variables, okay, and change the variables so that they can find which variables cause it to make it most efficient and grow the fastest. That makes sense? Yeah, they do it on a computer. So they do it in real life. They actually create these, they grow them. And then what they found is, and this is the movie part, when they compared the real live 3D images with the computerized simulation, they look different. Now, we know it has to do with computers. Remember we talked about polygons being used to create the model, or pixelation. We know there's some variation there. But they decided to create a scanning program so that they could take the 3D model, the 3D image in real life, scan it, and come up with coordinates to make a data set. You know, it's not very hard to do. We do it with 3D printers. That's what we do now. We have laser scanners that can be put through a town and drive through a town and then transfer that images into a computer so it has quantized values. It's not that hard. In fact, they sort of did that, a simulation of that with the movie Tron. Remember where we scanned him, but actually it sort of sucked his particles into the device, and that's the science fiction part of it. We're not there yet if that's the case. But what they did is they compared these data sets, and they found some anomalies, and they weren't sure. So in the movie, they sent these two data sets. One is the primary, they call it the real 3D image, and the second is the computer simulation model. They sent them to independent labs to review these data sets, right, to compare them. And all of the laboratories came back and said, it appears there's anomalies and discrepancies, and that the data set secondary, which is the one that's the real life scanned images, that they appear to be tampered with. There appears to be some kind of viral-like structure to it. And so, you know, that the data has been contaminated, because you're telling me these are the two, they're supposed to be equal data sets. Now, I use that in the movie to kind of extrapolate the fact that that may be indications of a primal virus or viral-like structure in the code. First, you'd have to agree with me that everything has a quantized value. That's the first thing you'd have to do. And say, oh, okay, numbers, algorithms, computer formulas. Okay, I could see it's a computer-coded like structure. And so what I'm saying is, take the next leap, which is your randomness, noise, your static, your chaos, the disorder, and asymmetry, and assign it a name. And it's like a virus. What does a virus do? Well, a virus can be either active or inactive. But when a virus is active, all that it does is reproduce itself to the destruction of the host. That's all a virus does. The really damaging viruses is that they just reproduce themselves. Why? That's what we see in the flu. What do we have? H3N2 that's going around with the variant type A and type B. I've already had it 3 times. Fortunately, it hasn't been that bad compared to what other people, so maybe that's good. You know, I'm building up immunities for the A type and the B type. But the point is that the virus only task is to reproduce itself. It has no other function. It doesn't do anything. There's no evolutionary model for improving it. It adapts itself so that it functions more effectively, but all it does is reproduce. My point being that we have something in this world in which we live in that is very similar. The junk DNA, the background noise that you see, the static, the disorder, and we have something we even call the chaos theory with the butterfly effect to try to explain how weird things happen, why we can't predict the weather, because one particular event may affect many other events. Well, I say that's part of the viral-like activity. So the one unique characteristic of what I'm sharing is that once you have that perspective, once you believe this is like a program, and once you believe there's a virus-like structure effectively changing and affecting everything negatively, then the next step, logically in my opinion, is why? Why is this like this? And depending on how you answer this question, leads you to the next conclusion. Is there an antivirus? And is there, once you establish there's a reason. So I'm just flat out going to tell you what I think. I think that and I described this in the movie, the universal programmer, I'm going to go to the movie now. The universal programmers, the way that I see it, because I classify them as the architects. I understand the Matrix used the architect labeling as well. But this is the way I see it, that they create things, the code they use is unlimited. It has good and evil in it. It has the potential for it. And that makes sense. If you say you're the universal programmer and you are aware of everything, you would know both good and evil. Now the problem in the movie, I call them messenger class beings. There's a messenger class being who then goes to the universal programmer and says, hey, I want the code you're using. I notice you have a different code. And they're like, yeah, we're the programmers. No, I want that code. No, you can't handle that code. Well, why? Because it has good and evil in it. And you who are in the program, that code, the potential for good and evil becomes kinetic because it becomes active. And in the movie I say it's like an if-then loop, an if-then statement. It meets the conditions, meaning that it has a beginning. And the programmers are outside the program. They created this time-dimensional structure. So once this messenger class being then takes the code and he incorporates it, and it does corrupt it. Now, it says that 1/3 of all these messenger class beings get corrupted by this code, which leads me to a mathematical equation or ratio that possibly everything that's made has 2/3 potential for good and 1/3 potential for evil. And that everything has that same ratio. Now, there's some statistics for sales that talks about if you're a really good salesman, 1/3 of the people will buy from you at any time because they're just there and you're at the right time in the right place. 1/3 will never buy from you because that just won't happen. But if you can get the third in the middle, you can get 2/3 of every person, like 66%, that's phenomenal sales. Even in baseball, Babe Ruth was 300 and something, which is he struck out, he had 2 strikes for every one ball that every 3 balls, he hit one of them. And that was great. To have a 333 batting average is good, especially if you're consistent. Especially if every time you come to bat, every 2 strikes that you get, can you get 1 hit? And if you hit a homer, you're amazing. So my belief is that when the universal programmers design in the movie, when they designed this structure, they put some other beings in it. Messengers were on level. They put caretaker beings here. And the caretaker beings were manipulated and deceived by the messenger, one of those messenger beings, I call him Hillel, to adopt this code. It's kind of like the movie Pleasantville. Has anybody ever seen the movie Pleasantville? That movie is exactly what I think is wrong with the way that we look at the world. So in this movie, Pleasantville, it's all black and white. It's got Reese Witherspoon and the guy, who was the first Superman guy? The young man. Anyways, you know what I'm talking about. He was in the movie with it. And they're all nice kids, and they go to school, and they go home, and they say hi to their parents, and it's all like goody two-shoes. They're making fun of it, right? And it's all dingy and boring. But then one day, they decide to experiment with sex. And then color enters their world. And then they start doing some things that are like not right, you know, challenging the morals. And then color enters the world. Why? Because the idea in this world that we live in is that we need both good and evil. That's what makes us truly human. But my belief in the movie, the way I explain it, is that now that we're here, there has to be a mechanism to rid the evil out of this time-space dimension that we live in. And in my opinion, I talked about it, that I believe selfless love, I know that sounds kind of crazy, but selfless love is the mechanism of which we connect outside of this dimension to the virus-free world. Why? Because when you're moving in selfless love, you're thinking about someone else. You're not thinking about yourself. It illustrated by someone who would give up their life, a mom who has a child that wanders into the road, and she runs into the road and pushes the child out of the way and gets hit by the car because she's willing to give her life up for her child. That's selfless love, if you know what I'm trying to get at. The fact that you put someone else above your own needs. So I think there's a connection. And if you ask me, and the way I explain it, is that I can't think of a more equitable and fair method for deciding who gets into the next virus-free world than people who want selfless love. Because if you're selfish, I don't really want you in that world. Because if I'm selfless, I'm going to be more interested in others. An old story was told of somebody said, "Oh, what would be a hellish place on earth or a heavenly place on earth?" And the guy said, "Well, imagine, if you will, that your hands are connected to 10-foot tongs. And you had all the greatest food you could imagine, banquets of the most delicious, delectable, succulent food that man has ever created. But it was on a table when you went to eat that was 10 feet long. And you could only feed your neighbor across from you. You couldn't feed yourself. No matter what you wanted to do with those 10-foot tongs attached to you when it came time to eat, you could never feed yourself. It only takes one person in that system to mess it up. Do you see what I'm saying? Because every person has to take care of every other person. Does that make sense? And if one person decides they're not going to take care of the other person, that could affect everybody else. That's what I think the next virus-free world is, and that's why I think the purpose of the virus here is for people who connect with selfless love will be able to pass through. I think the last virus filter is death. And your consciousness apparently goes to that filter, and depending whether or not you have that connection, that selfless love connection, you don't have permeability. There's a lot of things, permittivity, permeability, electromagnetic properties that we talk about in science, but they apply to the fact that you won't be able to pass through that filter. You'll be quarantined. And I don't want to be misunderstood, but all the selfish people, they deserve to go with them. Let them go with each other. They need each other, wherever that is. But all the people who say, I'm willing to live a selfless life and love other people more important than myself, they get to pass through. Now, they no longer have the potential for good and evil. They've taken their good and evil code and they've swapped their operating system. Does that make sense? I mean, I'm just explaining to you, hopefully the logic, I'm not saying you do not have to agree with me. I just want you to think. The purpose of this is to get you to start thinking differently. That if this is like a program, and if there is viral-like activity, what is the purpose? And if there is the possibility of an antivirus, and we do connect through selfless love, and death is like a filter, and we want to get to that next virus-free life, what are the implications? That means we are now then put in the original state in which we were originally programmed, but without the potential for good and evil. If you understand it, it'd be like if you took a chair, and it has 2/3 property for good and 1/3 for evil, and we put it through a filter where now it can only be used for good. There's no way it could be used. It couldn't be used to hit anybody. It couldn't be used to hurt anybody. It couldn't be used to be pulled out from behind anybody. It would change everything. And that's what I'm wanting people to think about, is what would the next dimension be like? And so if we start to think about that now, then I think we start to consider what is our purpose here. It's not to gather money. It's not to be smart. Because think about it. The fair method is using selfless love means that even a mentally retarded person now has the same access to that next dimension as a super intelligent person. That's, I think, more fair, in my opinion. Sure, I mean, do I think I'm relatively smart? Yeah, I'm probably in some areas really smart, but that's not what's going to get me to where I want to be. It's my ability to love my fellow person and to exhibit that love in a relationship. Now, what's the parallel with a relationship? The relationship is like a network. What's happening in Wreck-It Ralph 2 and what's happening would be in Tron and what's happening in some of these others like in the Matrix is now we understand that we have to have a network connection. We find our purpose, we find the program that we were created for seems to be manifested it's more pronounced, it's more visible, more obvious when we are in network with other people. That's what the whole viral, like YouTube, if something goes viral, that's the whole purpose of that, is that many, many people have decided to like it, and now it has a greater purpose. It's risen to the top of the list because of all of the likes and all of the views. Why? That's based upon networking. So the selfless love is our goal, but also our ability to network, our relationship. And those are the two goals that I think this theory, I hope, helps people to see, is the goal to act in selfless love and the goal to act in relationship with one another. And I think that's pretty amazing, because that takes science, that takes a theory of everything and gives it a direct application to how we function every day, how we drive. Oh man, I don't know about you, but this place. Listen, I was in Washington, D.C., okay? I was there for like 3 days. I drove back and forth from Richmond, Virginia, where I have cousins, to Washington, D.C. Twice, every day I would drive, right? I think I called 911 3 times, okay? I don't know how many miles that is. I think it was like 3 hours, so maybe it was like 150 miles from Richmond, Virginia. I'd have to ask Grant and Lee and Lincoln. They know exactly how far. Of course, it took them a lot longer. How far it is. When I got off the plane in Albuquerque, I think it was like 2 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so it wasn't rush hour. My house is 10 miles from the airport. I called 911 7 times. Why? These people were crazy. Literally people who were driving 80, 90 miles an hour. You know the turn when you get off by past Lead and Coal and you go up there to where it was Indian School crosses? You know, there's a real sharp corner there. People swerving in and out 85, 90 miles an hour on that corner. It was the same, I used the same criteria. You see what I'm saying? Dangerous drivers. You have to be a dangerous driver for me to call 911, because I'm busy. I don't have time to do that. I for a while was a reserve sheriff deputy, so I'm a little hypersensitive. I've been in a head-on collision. I'm alive today. I had a car doing 60 and I was going 50. We hit head-on. And that'll change your life. You have something like that happen to you. So yeah, I'll admit I'm a little hypersensitive. But I used the same exact criteria I did in Washington, D.C. as I used here. What's my point? My point is this, I think this place is a little bit more dangerous. I do. I think it's because we don't have enough police. I think there's a lot of issues where the police don't stop people because they're too busy with the really felony crimes, and they don't want to deal with the traffic issues. But the point is that I have to act in selfless love, and that's tough when I have someone who almost tried to kill me. Do you know? I don't know if you get what I'm saying. That's where the rubber meets the road. When someone tries to kill you, and you realize that you still have to be loving and kind to them, not an easy thing to do. And if you, at some point, could ever have a relationship with that person, to network with them, something that you wouldn't have to be ashamed of. I tell the story because it's a true story of the guy who was on the road. He was in a hurry to get to his job interview, and he flipped one of these people off. Well, when he went to his job interview, guess who he saw when he walked in the door? This state is a small state. You run into the governors and senators and the representatives and the county commissioners and the mayors and I can go on and tell you all the regular folks that drive around here, the movers and shakers, so to speak. And you don't ever know when you're going to actually see that person. And you'd be surprised that sometimes they'll remember who you are. Because especially if you don't have those really illegally tinted windows and they see your face. So my point is that I want us to think about things differently. I've got a little outline here. I want to look at some things maybe if I've missed. I want to use, I heard a program on National Public Radio about, they were developing prosthetics for people, especially a lot of veterans come back from Iraq, I hope not Iran, Iraq and Afghanistan, and they've been in attacks with IEDs upon their convoys or whatever, and they've lost limbs. And we have a significant amount of veterans who are in that situation. So there are a lot of grants and research projects now to try to help people who are amputees. And in this program, they revealed something that I think connected with what my belief is, this theory is, that they were trying to use biofeedback. And you know what that means? That means sensors that are located on the outside of their skull, on their head, to take electromagnetic readings that come from certain regions of the brain. And then they would use those to then manipulate the prosthetic arm and the fingers. And they could train that. A person can train a mechanical device to actually function like an arm, to pick up things depending on what they think about or what they decide. Some of them had, let's say if you had a stub or you had a stub here, there were neural endings that they could use. But not in all cases, depending on the damage. Especially with people who have spinal nerve damage. You know that. The connections are gone. The electromagnetic properties of those nerves don't function anymore. So they try to use these, the ones on their head. And what they found, something very interesting, they wanted to program these electromagnetic biofeedback responses to see if they could help other amputees who weren't as adept. Because you know what I'm saying. Physically, we're not all at the same level. Some people are, I happen to be a drummer. So I have probably some fast twitch muscles, and I've, over the years, practiced. And I can do 4 different things at one time with every hand. Syncopation, jazz, and things like that. It's a little complicated, okay? If I ask someone else to just start doing that, they may or may not be able to do it. One of the reasons I actually learned to be a drummer is I have rhythm. I don't know what they call that, but call it soul, whatever. I have that ability to hear music and move parts of my body in such a way that it's, rhythmical. I know how to keep a beat. So I knew when I was a little kid that I had that in me. But I will tell you, it was hard work to learn. First thing the kids did when I was growing up is they played Wipeout. They played it on the desk. That was their thing. And the faster you could do it, the cooler you were, right? Well, I wasn't very good at it. But in my mind, I believed that I had these capabilities and I was going to transfer it to my fingers and my hands. The same way that they try to use these prosthetics, these mechanisms to transfer the physical coordination capabilities of some patients to others, right? A computer program that could remember and have to memorize this. Well, what they found out, this is like really strange, is that they would put up a wall, a panel, right? And then they would release the panel or move the panel and expose certain maze or certain objects. Let's say like a round peg goes in a round hole, or maybe a certain maze that you have to move it through, right? And they would want to do it in real time. And what they found out is that they were able to pick up a millisecond, and I don't know exactly how fast it was. I apologize. I've got to do some more research on that. But the indication was before they lifted the panel, there was a micro time advanced awareness of what was behind the panel before the panel was lifted. Why? Because they saw the electromagnetic responses on the biofeedback that the computer measured. And they did a SMPTE time sync, which is a way that you do like when you're doing movies. Everything is in syncing in time. And that fits into my belief that in fact that we live in a delayed time cycle. That this life that we exist in is like a surveillance system, a security surveillance system. If you know anything about security surveillance system, they have what they call motion detection. And the way they have motion detection is they record something, but they record it, and the actual recording will start in a way so it's back here, so the device can then remember that motion was detected 5 seconds ahead of time. Does that make sense? In other words, they know that something happened. So it was a delay. You can see the delay even though light is said to travel somewhere near 186,000 miles per second, and that's a variable. We call them a constant, but that's because the variations go up and back depending on our measuring instruments are affected. It's difficult to get an exact. There's even something called the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. You can't even know that you measure something other than the fact that it was there at that time, because wherever it is, it's now moved. So my point is that there's a delay. You can see that when, let's say I'm videotaping this and I'm at a big lecture, right? Let's say the room has a big screen up there, and I raise my hand like this. What happens on that screen? My hand goes like this, and on the screen, it's like this. It's behind it. Even though light travels that fast, there's a delay just in our own recording equipment. I speculate that we live in a delay. And, however, the people who are operating in selfless love, because they are linked now with that virus-free dimension, somehow that link causes them to slightly move ahead of time. Slightly. Now in that area, they have more cognition. I call it discernment about what goes on with them. Now in the movie, the book that's supposed to be a movie, I explain it by the illustration of a high-speed train going from Berlin to France, to Paris. And on it is a very frustrated young Muslim individual who has decided to give up on everything. He's going to give up on his religion. He's going to give up on everything he believes. He's had it with this world, and he has in his backpack C4 explosives, and he's got a remote trigger with him, and he's just going to blow the crap out of this train. And on this train sits a member of the Vitruvian Code Project team, a guy who believes in this theory and dedicated the principle of trying to influence people that this theory has validity. And because this Vitruvian Code Project member operates slightly ahead of time, because he's doing the selfless love thing, right? And he's trying to be in relationship with people. His goal isn't money, it's not education, it's not intellect, it's not collecting material things. It's not just to make the world a better place for himself, but he's thinking about others. Because of that, he now has this thing I call discernment. And he discerns that there's a problem with this young man. He sees some sadness in him. He's aware of other individuals because he's trying to be in network and relationship. So what he does is he finds a way to open up the relationship, a talk, just, assalamu alaikum, and kind of, opening up. And he ends up seeing that there's a problem and explains to this young man, he says, I perceive that you are frustrated with this life. I perceive that you've had it with the way this world is. Would you like to know why this world is all messed up? And he proceeds to explain to him kind of what I'm doing with you and the fact that the world is like a code and a program and there's a virus in it. And that's what you're running into. You're running into the virus because you're operating in a delay. And so all the crap that's happening is happening to you and you're powerless to make any changes because you're behind the time curve. By the time it's already happened, it's over with. If you want to have real influence in the world, think about all the great speakers, inspirational people. They think and have a vision of the future. You ever notice that? It's almost as if they're already in the future, and they're bringing you with them. Every word that they speak, you're like, yeah, I want to be like that. Oh yeah, they're pulling you forward in time. And so this guy is explaining to him there's a virus, there's a purpose for the virus, and he explains him the antidote, or the antivirus, about selfless love and relationship, and there's a group of people that believe in this, and in the movie, the book, for the movie, the guy totally just gets it. He gets it. The young man gets it. And he's like, he breaks down. And they just start, I know it sounds kind of cheesy, but they just emotionally just bond right there. Because this man understands him and has accepted him. He knows. And he goes, and I know what you were planning on doing. Because he had observed earlier is that as he began to talk, there was a trigger and the young man's hand was moving slowly towards it. But as he began to finish his talk and explain what's wrong with the world, the young man took his hand back and completely became relaxed. So my point is, you want to have a real difference in this world? You need to have that connection to the selfless love. You need to realize the goal is networking a relationship, and that will slightly accelerate you in time. You'll find your real meaning, your real purpose in life, your program, the thing you're programmed to do, and now you can pull others forward with you. As opposed to, and think about it, the evil in this world, what does it do? It pulls people back in time. All of this, how can I say it? Over-occupation with bad things, does it ever bring out the best in us? No, really. If there's a tragedy in this country and something happens, many times people go, they regress. They become angry. They become, remember we talking about divisive. They become polarized. They begin to talk about those people out there. What was that person? Was he this color? Was he this religion? Was he this mindset? Was he this political party? If you think about all the great changes in history, good and bad, you'll see that either people were brought forward and inspired to be more loving and kind. And I think Martin Luther King would satisfy that. I don't think there's any, I don't think anybody would argue with that. The guy practiced something that's crazy. Non-violence? I mean, I don't know if you've seen it, but it was pretty, my understanding is in history is that what made a change in this country is when they were doing these live broadcasts of the march on the Selma Bridge in Selma, Alabama, they saw these people who were just peacefully marching that said, we just want to be able to go to the same bathroom. We just want to go to the same water fountain. We just want to be treated the same. And they saw them viciously attacked. Viciously. They set dogs on them. I've seen it. They were walking, this one lady, and they were singing, some hymn, and somebody just clubbed her right in the head. And she just gets up, she wasn't angry, and she just starts walking again, and somebody else beats her with another club from behind. That was at the point that this country decided, that's it. This movement has validity because that's the selfless love. That's what they were doing, and they were in relationship together. So that's just one historical event. Another one we could point to is Hitler. And I think what we see in Hitler is, this inspiring speaker, the ability to attract people, but at the same time, he blamed a certain class of people for all of Germany's problems. Now, was he able to get them out of the depression? Yeah, I don't know if you know the story, what was happening at the time, but it took a barrel full of Deutschmarks to buy a loaf of bread. It was awful. We don't know anything what that's like. And so people were angry about the fact they couldn't even feed their families, they couldn't jobs, and they saw this as an opportunity to blame it on a class of people, and they all bought into it, and in my opinion, they went backwards in time. Now, we were talking earlier about something, I think there's some truth in antiquities or writings of antiquities, okay? Whether you want to talk about the Quran or you want to talk about the some of the ancient, even Hindu writings, there's a lot of parallels. You'll see they all have stories about floods, or they have stories kind of similar to what we call the Tower of Babel idea. I think there's something here to be said, and I'm not going to go into it real deep, but I'm just saying once you have this philosophy, you start looking at history differently. I see where at some point the human race collectively was pretty advanced. Whether you want to talk about the Mayan culture, whether you want to talk about the Egyptian culture, whether you want to talk about the Chinese culture, you're talking about geographical regions in remote places, and they seem to exhibit some pretty advanced technology. There's some stuff, I don't know if it's real or not. You find these devices and they figure out what they think it might be, and it's really advanced. We still can't put together, I guess, the bricks the same way they do to build the pyramids, even with our technology. So something was going on. There is some historical precedent that at one time men were networked together through their language. I don't know how that works exactly, but they apparently could communicate. And then at some point, they became disjointed in their ability to communicate. And from what it looks like, it apparently coincides with the same time that we went from this great technological advantages that we had in humanity to like the Stone Age or something, where we were stupid. It's almost like the tools were taken away from us. Now, in the Vitruvian Code Project, in the movie, the book that becomes the movie, I actually speculate that the first beings were called the caretaker beings in that movie. They had access to advanced technology. And at some point when they got the virus, that technology was removed from them. And now they no longer had access to it. And if you think about it, that would be 3 indications of the same thing that we're experiencing today. We have technology, and at some point it gets taken away from us. So that would be like the internet today. If suddenly we lost access to the internet, we wouldn't be as smart as we are collectively. Would you not agree that that is the aggregate collective data of our intelligence is seen through the internet, the way that we connect to each other? I don't know about you, but YouTube's getting crazy, man. There's amazing stuff on there. Wiki is getting amazing. I mean, it used to be that it was just like, you could never really trust it. But the algorithms that they're using now, generally speaking, it's getting pretty sophisticated. So now we have networked internet, humanity talking one language, basically through zeros and ones. I went to get the Vice theory, I wanted to get it translated in Spanish. So I have some Spanish friends in Mexico. And they said, man, this is a lot of work. So I just went online and started, hey, can I translate an entire book? There's 80 pages. And Google Translate, it's not perfect, but it did it all in less than like 10 seconds. 80 pages, boom, translated in another language. Now I send it to them, and they can go through and just fix things. Euphemisms, misnomers, analogies, things that we do in English that don't make any sense. My daughter is trying to learn Spanish. I speak Spanish conversationally, functionally. But I still think in English, so there's things I say that are not accurate. My syntax and grammar, I was telling this one guy my grammar was bad, and he said, and I thought he was going to respond in Spanish, and he speaks English perfectly. He said, what's wrong with your grammar? I said, no, mi grammar está muy malo. So he understood. But the point is that we can't always translate it directly. You know that. Like I could say, I'm in a pickle. You guys know what that means, right? I'm in hot water, right? But if I say, yo estoy en agua caliente, that's like, what are you taking a bath? What's your purpose in being in hot water? I don't know if any of you speak another language, but that happens in any language. You just can't directly translate literally. So anyways, my point is that we have this advanced technology. If the internet was gone from us tomorrow, we would be hurting. We really would. I don't know about you, but almost all my resources now are on the internet. I hardly ever go to a library anymore and look at a reference book. But I will tell you, there is a huge lag in our technology for history. And we do have to start digitizing some of these great reference books, because they have a perspective that we don't have online. You can't even study things. If it's not on the internet, if it's in the 50s, if somebody hasn't put it on the internet, it's not there. And the only way you're going to find it is in a library, in a book that was printed in the 50s. So we've got to digitize our history and put it into the internet, and we're getting there, but we're not there. But the point is, our active modern intelligence, gathered aggregate intelligence, we are now the most advanced, obviously technologically speaking, civilization that probably even existed, even from the Egyptians and the Mayans, because they didn't have that internet. They had that common language, but they still had the distance barrier. We don't know how they connected those two. And then we have maybe the early beings, the early humanity, and I think they had some great technological resources. And I think that they were banned from that because they adopted the virus. That was the decision they made. And in the movie, the way I see it is, you talk about the Adam and Eve and the fruit idea. I say it's a plant-like bioorganic interface to a computer neural network. It's just an idea. And so when they took that biological plant-like interface and incorporated it, because apparently they were able to have that, the interface they had then was different than one we have now, it allowed the virus to enter into them and corrupted them. We don't have that now. All we have is an analog interface. And you know the story, you don't ever really touch the nucleus of another element. You never do. It's the electromagnetic field, the aggregate field. Either they are aligned and they fit together, or if they're not aligned and they're asymmetrical in pattern, they repulse each other. And so you know what it's like, we had a co-op today, an educational co-op that we participate, and I was one of the instructors. I was working with second and third graders. And it's so funny because we were talking about magnets, and the kids wanted to talk about black holes and dark energy and dark matter. I was trying to get them to do magnetism, and the kids wanted to talk about, antimatter. It was the craziest thing ever. But I was trying to get them to see, you take two poles, two north poles, and you try to do it, what happens? They repel each other. Well, did you know that is actually what happens when you touch something? It's just the electromagnetic field that keeps you from not passing through another object. That's all. The light that's either reflected, absorbed, or emitted is what you see as colors, and what you see as texture. That's all that you see. It's the electromagnetic wavelengths that are bouncing off an object and entering into your eyes. But keep in mind, you're an analog being. You're not a digital being. You don't directly interact with the numerical values of those electrons and protons. So that's my point also, is that we are not going to have that, in my opinion, that antivirus, that connection to the next antivirus dimension until we've learned to manage this analog interface. And this generation, rolling this all back to conclusion, is the first generation to swap their analog physical interface for a direct digital interface. First time in the history of the world. And I think there's some great things. But let me tell you 3 things that I understand AI is, artificial intelligence, what it is, just to kind of wrap this thing up. You, in my opinion, only have control directly over two things. That's it. You have absolute control over what you think. Nobody can tell you what to think. Nobody can make you think anything. Nobody can even see what you think. And what you decide. You can decide whatever you want. There's a little story about Johnny in a classroom, and the teacher says, Johnny, you sit down. I want you to sit down right now. And he sits down and he says, well, I want you to know in my mind I'm standing. And the idea is that you can decide to do something. You don't have any control over what happens around you. In fact, you have no control of anything. What you wear could be subject to whether it's dirty or not. There's an old story about what's the difference between men and women. When a woman says she has nothing to wear, it means there's nothing she wants to wear. There's nothing new or nothing interesting. When a man says there's nothing to wear, it's dirty. It's got literally nothing to wear. The point being is that it depends how you look at it. So what does that mean? You're trying to wrap artificial intelligence around what you think, what you decide. And the last one, which is the culmination of these two, is the collection of memories and experiences, whether you learn from it. The things you thought, the things you've decided. So if Johnny finally comes to the conclusion that every time that he disobeys his teacher, something bad happens, he may eventually change what he thinks and what he decides based on this historical memory of his experiences. That's it. Did you know that's what artificial intelligence is? That's all it is. If you can get a computer to think for itself, to decide from itself, and to learn for itself, you have artificial intelligence. You have what we now call consciousness. That's all you really are. You and I are only the collection of what we thought and decided and what we've learned. That's it. That's all we are. I could literally take those memories out of your brain and put them like Avatar into another object, and you would continue to exist. So what is my point? When you die, maybe that continues to exist, and it either goes through the virus filter to the other side, becomes resident somewhere else, still there, still who you are, or you can be quarantined and put somewhere else and embedded in something else. I don't think we're too much different, and I'm not trying to say we're computers, but I'm trying to get you to see there's some parallels here. Parallels so that you can think about what the future's all about and what the present's all about by also understanding a little bit about the past. I don't know about you, but that is phenomenal. If you've got that kind of perspective on the past, the present, and the future, you're at peace with yourself. You then can live in harmony with other people. That's cool. That's cool. You can explain why bad stuff happens. You can now understand why bad things happen to good people, because there's a certain amount of randomness, like the butterfly, the chaos effect, because of the viral-like properties that exist in our society and structure. Things just happen. Bad things happen to everybody. You could just be going down the road. Listen, I was driving down the road, minding my own business, and a lady ran the red light and hit me. Just ran right into me. Boom! Remember I told you a little hypersensitive to crashes and accidents and traffic? I think you can see why. That's crazy. And then she had the nerve. Fortunately, none of us were hurt. It was right at the corner of Washington and Manal. Nobody was hurt. I was angry about it, and I got out of the car to see if she's okay. And once I learned she was okay, I'm worried about her. I was like, "You ran the red light." And you should have seen her face. She was like, I don't know what happened. Well, come to find out, later on, I ended up having to sue her insurance company, Geico, because she had missed her turn to her house. She wasn't even turning where she was supposed to. She'd gone past her house. She was distracted for some reason, didn't even see the light. And we were able to prove in court, we did a traffic reconstruction, a forensic reconstruction, based upon the debris and the matter and everything like that. She just lied through her teeth about everything. Didn't match the forensic evidence at all. And we sued and we won. Well, at least we got a settlement, which I thought was kind of cool. My point being is that I was minding my own business. I wasn't necessarily doing it, wasn't drinking, wasn't drugging, wasn't smoking, wasn't on my phone, wasn't doing anything, I was watching out. I don't know about you, but you cannot see a red light runner sometimes when you're going through an intersection. I don't care how smart you think you are. There's other traffic, there's poles, there's buildings, there's trees. You will not be able to see it. My point is that if you believe that this is a program, if you believe that you have a program specifically for you, and you're doing what the program says, what you're programmed to do, and you have meaning, and you have purpose, and you have a peace in your life, and you're living a selfless life, and you're living in relationship to others, man, it doesn't get any better than that. You understand now how things work. You're doing good. And that's my point, is that there are so many people in this world now who are discouraged, depressed, lost, can't explain it, and we have all these intellectual theories, and my big problem with all these intellectual theories, and I love them, I love string theory, superstring theory, E8 dimensional structures is really cool, man. The idea that, you know, crystals kind of give you some insight into the way things are structured, and then maybe that's the way they are actually made. But what's the application in my life on a daily basis? How does that help me treat my daughters, or treat my wife, or treat my friends? If it doesn't make me a better person, I don't know. I don't know if that's really what I want to spend my time on. So my point tonight is to kind of give you an overview of what this is about, the vice theory, a virus in the code of everything, that if life is like a computer, then these are certain things that happen in our world that should have application, because they happen in the computer world, have application to our real life. And what are we going to do about it? So I hope you enjoyed my time, and we're going to stop it now and do a little question and answer. I'm going to open that up. We'll put that on the... Do you want to just stop it now, Mateus, and then would that kind of make sense? At least kind of give an idea? You heading out? All right, thanks, man. Any questions, Jeff?
There's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think I want people to see that it's okay to have a theory of everything, but it should have an application, past, present, and future, and it should be consistent across all boards. Knowing that there's a possibility of a virus in the code should change even the way we do medicine. Because one of the things that we do, we have what's called a mechanistic model of medicine right now, where we treat ourselves as machines. But if we were to incorporate the idea of consciousness into our medicine, we'd have to look at things a little differently. For example, right now, we throw out the sample patterns that respond to the placebo effect in a double-blind scientific study. You guys know that, right? That's when they're testing a medicine, they give a portion of that same sample, they give them a sugar pill. And whoever responds to the sugar pill, they just take that sample and just throw it out. Because they can't reproduce. Well, science is that. Tell them what science is. What you've learned from your dad. Can anyone of you say what science is? What science?
That which is reproducible in a controlled environment for measurable and predictable results.
That's what science is. That's a concise. I think that's kind of cool that I talk about. I actually know the sign language for that too, which is kind of awesome.
I took a long time to memorize that.
Yeah.
I remember in like 4th grade.
So my point is that there's a certain part of our life, we call it love, okay? I cannot take a Geiger counter and go, and then go, and measure love. But we know that in one sense, it's right up there with particles and forces. It's some kind of amazing force that affects people. It changes people. It takes a coward and turns them into a lion. It takes a class of people in our country who are being prejudiced and treated woefully, and it turns them into an equal class because of somebody who operated in that love arena. So I have some friends who are quantum physicists. One of them who works at Los Alamos on some pretty cutting edge technology. And I told him, I said, I believe that at some point we will be able to see that love is a scientific property. Much like dark energy and dark matter. We can't measure it, but we can see the effects of it. You would agree, we can see the effects of it. We cannot directly measure dark energy and dark matter yet. We cannot. It's just not possible. Because it possibly exists, it's transdimensional. I speculate, just throwing this out, that love might be like a massless particle that's transdimensional. And that's that connection that we have to that next virus-free dimension. I don't really know, but I'm going to stick with something that I think helps create consistency. Medicine, like I was saying, might be changed. We might incorporate love into our treatments for people. We know that's true with even little babies that are in orphanages, that if you don't love them and care for them, their ability, I forget what it's called, fitness or viability. There's a medical term for that. Viability, I think, is affected. So let's look at sociology. Let's look at even the way that we treat each other, right? If we come up with a consistent theory of how to treat each other kindly And with love, then we look at, what do we have? Some other sciences. We've got the physical sciences, just the way we look at things even. The way we measure things, the way that we build things. Moving away from the mechanistic model to kind of like a holistic kind of viewpoint, I think ultimately is going to help us. Yeah. You have a question?
Yes.
Yes.
How'd you come up with this idea and the whole virus and
I think I've been looking for some kind of consistent, I'm really big into consistency, which means that I'm kind of frustrated with my own life because I'm not very consistent in what I do. I wanted my life to be physically consistent. I wanted to keep myself as much in shape and eat right as I could. I wanted to be mentally, keep myself alert. I wanted to be socially, be able to connect with people. I wanted to be financially able to take care of myself and pay bills and hopefully someday help other people. I wanted to be, if you want to call it spiritually, I wanted to be able to understand that connection. So I tried to be consistent. One thing I look for in life is consistency. And when I see science, I want to find it's not just consistent in science. I want to see how it affects humanity, sociologically speaking. I want to see the way it affects us, the way we treat each other. And I think that's what I've been looking for is consistency. So, I think now it's okay for me at my age, and I don't mind saying how old I am. I'm 60 now. My testosterone level is low. It's not what it used to be. My ego is a lot more wounded over the years, and I'm just a more humble person. And I think that I could now take a message that may be, who knows, could go viral, could be world-changing, and I think that it wouldn't destroy me. So I think our lives, certain things happen at a certain time, and I think that now might be also important. My background also has lent a lot to where I am now. 30 years in the IT world. I've considered a subject matter expert on certain IT issues. Also gives me some credibility to looking at technology and seeing patterns. I don't know about you guys, but I am tired of learning new operating systems. I literally started, when I was in high school, there were no personal computers. There were no computers in our school, nothing. If you wanted to study computers, you went to the district office and you got an old IBM and you used COBOL or Fortran and you had punch cards. And you had a class that met and you would take your cards to the district office and they'd submit them, and it would take 2 to 3 days just to find out if you had an error in your program. That's how it started. And then, from the very first computers that they had CPM computers. My first computer was a WordStar computer. And I had a disk A, 360 KB floppy disk, and if you used a hole punch on the other side, you could flip it over. You get 720K. And I put WordStar, the program disk in A, and the data disk in B. And I started working for a printer, a publisher, and while I was in graduate school. And I was one of the first guys to create a Hebrew and a Greek printing program, because up until that point there wasn't any. And so I developed my own, which is kind of cool. So the first thing I wrote it in GW Basic. And so there was CPM, then there was DOS, then there was PC DOS, DOS 3.1, then there was Workgroup 3.1, there was Windows 95, then there was Apple IIe, Apple came out. There was the Lisa that came out for a while, which was really based on the Xerox word processor that they got from Xerox from the Palo Alto Research Center. They took that technology and Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak incorporated it into the Lisa, which became the Mac, which became the graphical interface. But Windows is crazy, man. From 3.1, 95, 98, 2000, ME, XP, it just goes on. Windows 7, Windows, what do we got? Windows 10. We've got Linux. I've been working with Linux, which we had Red Hat version. Then we had Ubuntu that we've been using recently, lately. There's been different versions of Linux. There's all the different versions of Android that have come out. There was a Symbian operating system for a while on the phones. I mean, I'm just at the point where I'm tired of all these different operating systems, and I'm looking for consistency. I'm looking for what makes it, I'm trying to get a general understanding of how everything works. I'm one of those guys that want to know how everything works. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but my mind goes all the time, literally. I'm one of those kids, I'll tell you a real quick story. So when I was 4 years old, I was in first grade, and we were at the monkey bars. I actually have a picture of it was in Okinawa, Japan. They've torn down that school since then, but I have an actual picture on my phone someone sent me of the very monkey bars where this happened. And all my friends are gathered together, and I told them, I said, hey, this is so cool. I go, 20 years from now, we're gonna wanna remember how fun this was. And I saw the look on the faces of my peers, like, dude, what planet are you from? This is like kindergarten and first grade. Are you like an alien? And I never forgot it. And I put that, I cataloged that in my brain, and I said, note to self, don't ever talk like that to your peers again. Never. Don't ever talk about the future. Don't ever talk about, those are inside thoughts. And until you learn how to say them, keep them to yourself. And so I'm one of those kids who's constantly thinking and figuring out how to fit in and how to understand and trying to act normal. Like I look to you guys, do I look normal? Do I look like a normal person?
So far.
But I know I'm a weirdo. I know I'm a truly weirdo because my mind never stops. I care about things and think about things nobody cares about. Nobody thinks about. It's like, dude, why do you do it? My girls will tell you, what kind of shows do I watch? What kind of shows do I watch on TV?
History Channel, science.
For fun. For fun.
That's fun.
Do you understand what a weirdo I am? I don't watch, and I'm not being mean because if the Kardashians ever see this, I'm not trying to be mean to them. I don't watch stuff like that. The Bachelor or whatever it is, I don't have time. I'm so interested to understand how things work and function. That's my entertainment. I love it. I can't stop learning. So I look normal, but I know I'm not normal, but that's okay because that's my purpose now, to take all this. I don't know if you know it, but I've had the greatest teachers in my life and the greatest professors and just some super people who have poured into me and said, you know what? You're a cool kid. I like you. I'm going to tell you things that I don't tell my other students. I'm going to talk to you in a way that I don't talk to other people. There's something unique about you. And they cultivated that. And now guess what? I'm giving it back. All those great teachers, all those great professors, I'm giving it all back. It's all coming out. It's all coming out. It's all in there. And now it's coming out in a way that I think helps people. So, long story, but that's the point, is that it's just the culmination of all that. I can't keep it in anymore. It's finally coalesced in a form that's palatable, if that makes sense. It's as, I'll tell you what, it's as definitely as palatable as some of the other junk I see on YouTube. I've literally seen people with 1 million views who, I'm sorry, but they really didn't have anything to say. The world is not a better place for having spent the 15 and 20 minutes for watching that. It was literally a waste of time. So if that makes any sense. Well, if there's not any other questions, I mean, we can just stop it and we can talk off the camera, but thank you very much for your time.